All right, everyone, thank you for being with us today. We are excited to get started. This is our final math product session of the day. So if you've been here through all of the math, thanks for sticking around, and we're excited to look at what Texas Home Learning can offer for grades 6 through 12 through Carnegie Learning Math. So I will hand it over to Anella to talk us through what we can learn about Carnegie today.
Thank you, Kendrick, and hello, everyone. So I'll equate this session to the last period class of the day, and you've had a long day, and we really appreciate your time and attention. And thank you to our TEA partners. We're grateful for this opportunity. So I have several team members here with me today from Carnegie Learning. I'll invite them just to identify themselves by dropping a note in the chat to introduce themselves, say hello, and let each of you know what their role is here at Carnegie Learning. And so in this high quality instructional materials adoption conference that you've been a part of today, we're really happy to talk with you about 612 math and what the possibilities are for implementing Carnegie Learning's Texas Math Solution. And I want to start with a big picture. And that big picture really is answering the first question of why? Why Carnegie Learning? And so on the screen, you'll see the big why, which is Carnegie Learning Blended Math was the subject of the largest U.S. Department of Education random controlled study. Over 2 years, including schools in Texas and indeed 18,000 students across the country. And the results were resoundingly positive that students who used the Carnegie Learning Blended Math Solution, as opposed to the control group who used what we might call a traditional math solution, showed better growth, significantly better growth. And in this particular time, when federal funding is being earmarked for evidence-based practices, and certainly when we all want students to get back to fully normal instruction, and we have to make up for some of what students didn't have the opportunity to learn, the power of the research to be our guide as educators, as academics, is the resounding reason why Carnegie Learning Texas Math Solution may make a whole lot of sense to you as a district leader, as a regional leader. So the results, again, were resounding, and you'll notice this bar graph that the control group of students who kept using a traditional math program, you saw their growth over 2 years. And so, what we do know is students do grow in their math proficiency. So there's a real testament to what we know teachers are doing excellently every single day. And we also know that putting high quality instructional materials in the hands of teachers and students makes a difference. And we know that because of those other two bars. The students who used the Carnegie Learning Algebra 1 blended solution showed more growth, significantly more growth than the students in the control group. But look at that right-hand bar, that kind of hot pink one. Notice that sort of the secret sauce is that the students who were using the Carnegie Learning blended solution and completed a minimum of 27 workspaces, you can think of those as big units, in the Mathia software showed tremendous growth, the kinds of gains that we're actually looking for, I might even say needing right now. So the big why is if your district has a mindset of using the research to be guided by this opportunity, we can find the silver lining even in the last year of our experience. Use this opportunity to bring in the materials, implement with a level of fidelity that could replicate these results. Maybe the question is, would you want these results for the students in your district? And of course, the answer is yes. So this visual gives you an idea of what Carnegie Learning Math would look like in a classroom environment. Now, certainly, we're also today going to talk about the adaptations that we have made through this partnership with TEA for remote learning. And there's an aspect of what you see here on the screen that is the same whether students are on campus or learning remotely, or there's some of both happening. So follow me here on this image. In the lower left-hand corner, you see the component of learning named called Learning Together. And those are the daily student math lessons. That's the core resource of the Carnegie Learning Blended Math Solution. And the digital interactive environment of those daily lessons is the core option that you have for adopting the Carnegie Learning Blended Math Solution through TEA. So that's teacher guided, teacher facilitated, teacher planned. That's where students are building their conceptual understanding of mathematics in a collaborative environment, working with their peers, grappling with the math. That productive struggle is happening. They're working through activities that began with the intuitive way that they notice math showing up in the world around them, and then getting down to those fine-grained knowledge components that are the building blocks for proficiency. The other component in that upper right-hand corner on the screen, you'll see named as learning individually. So there's time in the Carnegie Learning Blended Math Solution where students work in the Mathia software, monitored by teachers, because fundamentally teachers are the most important ingredient in a student's learning process, period. But it's the combination of learning together and learning individually that makes up the Carnegie Learning Blended Math Solution. So it's the blend of those learning modalities. Notice the blue circles diagonally from left to right. That instructional model, engage, develop, demonstrate, is consistent throughout a student's learning experience in the Carnegie Learning Texas Math Solution and also in a teacher's teaching experience through Carnegie Learning. So I'm just going to pause here and invite anyone with questions to put them in the chat. My team is ready to answer those. If you have a question that you want to articulate aloud, we're a fairly small group, and I invite that for sure. So we've been doing some big picture talking, so let's get a little bit more granular. So what are these resources for what courses, and how do they all work in alignment with the things that are important to math stakeholders across Texas? So you'll see in that orange box, core math curriculum for all the core courses, middle school and high school, along with accelerated courses for 6th and 7th grade for those students who are targeting being in Algebra 1 and having success in 8th grade. The materials, the learning together, are in digital format. All those files are printable in good old-fashioned PDF files, and then all of the resources are both in English and in Spanish. In the blue box, you'll see some notation about these resources being TEKS aligned, which we all know can mean a lot of different things. So I want to be really specific about what it means to this product, because for the last many months, a team of experts at TEA, a team of teachers across Texas, and a third-party review entity has been receiving our written lessons, reviewing them at a deep level, both for the spirit and the letter of the TEKS. And so these materials are highly aligned to, of course, what you're responsible for in terms of being a math leader or math teacher or a math stakeholder. So complete courses, 36 weeks of instruction, And that learning individually component in the Mathia software has TEKS-aligned sequences, being the learning individually part of a student's overall experience, reinforcing the learning that happens during the learning together component. One of the most powerful aspects of the Carnegie Learning Solution is the data that students' work in Mathia generates. Data that teachers in real time, while your student is working in the software, is using on his or her dashboard a tool called Live Lab, so that the teacher plays an essential role in also supporting students learning individually. And then after a software session is done, the data reports that come from the software are first and foremost designed to help me as a teacher make instructional decisions about the next learning together. And so it's that cycle of learning individually and together, that blend to give the students this strong, high quality math experience. At a more granular level, these 6 boxes represent all of the what. What is in this solution? Everything from supporting teachers through planning, digital access for students, so whether students are learning on campus or learning remotely, supporting all learners with particular adaptations, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then, of course, the assessment piece. Mathia is by design ongoing formative assessment. So ongoing stream of formative information for teachers and leaders and all stakeholders. So one of the principles that really guides what we do here in Carnegie Learning is in those blue letters at the top of the screen. Learning results only from when students do math and think math. Learning can only result from what students do and think, which logically as teachers that makes sense, because if it were up to what I was doing all day long, and we know how hard teachers work, then student learning would be always at a high level of proficiency. But what the learning together and learning individually creates are daily opportunities for students to do and think mathematics through this instructional model: engage, develop, and demonstrate. It anchors and grounds the work of learning mathematics and Carnegie Learning Texas Math Solution. So this learning together and learning individually is that blend of digital interactive lessons, and in the scope and sequence and pacing guides that we provide, that accounts for about 60% of a student's experience in any course. The learning individually accounts for about 40% of a student's independent learning in the Mathia software, again, supported in real time by the teacher, so that these 2 components make up 100% of students' opportunity to do and think mathematically. For teachers, there are also 2 tools. And so this gives opportunity for teachers to simplify and focus and really therefore be efficient, which efficient learning is at a premium now and certainly going into back to school next year. So for the teacher, there are daily lesson plans and pacing guides, all housed in what we call a teacher's implementation guide, not just a teacher's edition, but it really is a supportive tool that gives great, thoughtful questions for teachers to ask as students are learning together, developing their conceptual understanding, because the teacher creates the conditions by which students do and think, which again is the only way they actually can learn. That result of learning comes from doing and thinking. And then teachers receive that real-time data while students about 40% of the time are learning individually in the Mathia software. So for teachers, this might be an opportunity too, when you're asking yourself as district leaders, and I saw a few of you in the little Zoom boxes, you might be asking yourself, how can I help my teachers simplify and focus? Teachers have become even more adept this year at using a lot of resources. And there might be an opportunity to put all of those resources just on a shelf, not away forever, but just on a shelf, and simplify and focus while students are learning together and learning individually. So I'll just come back to close this section of our time together today to remind you of what's possible. And so if you have a role in a district or in a region to be a visionary leader, then this slide is really providing you with that big vision. And if you love reading research, just drop a note in the chat and somebody on the Carnegie Learning team will follow up and give you plenty of reading for your bedside table so that you can get deeper into understanding what this research was all about and how these results have been documented. So let's shift and get just a little bit more tactical. So what I'm showing you on the screen is a sample from grade 8. So how does this learning together and learning individually actually look Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? So on the screen, you'll see a chart from 8th grade. And what you will see is how teachers at this high level are first oriented to the pacing of that 60-40 blend of learning individually and learning together. So in the Carnegie Learning Texas Math Solution, the big topics are housed in modules. So module 1 leads into topic 1, a little bit more specific. And then within a topic, there are multiple lessons. Those lessons, numbered 1 and 2, as you see, are when students are learning together, guided and facilitated by their teacher. Now, we call a session 45 minutes, so teachers can adjust based upon their own class period, length of their class period. And in this model, students would be learning together in lessons 1 and 2 over that specified number of days in that far right-hand column. And then there would be a 45-minute session in the Mathia software. Now that can look a lot of different ways. Many of your districts have invested heavily, of course, in providing a device for every student. So that Mathia session could be on their own outside of school. It could be within school. It could be in a lab environment. It can look a lot of different ways, but students engage in a software session systematically as they are moving through learning the content. It averages about an hour a week in the software over an entire course. And then you'll see students come back to a learning together lesson, and then they move to another session in the Mathia software before, in this case, there's a mid-topic assessment, because any modules, any big chunk of learning that lasts more than 4 weeks, you will find both a mid-topic and an end-of-topic assessment. And so on a Monday through Friday sort of framework, this gives you a little bit more specificity around what does this concept of 60-40 learning individually and together look like. These pacing guides are all available for you. We're going to drop a link in the chat in just a moment to get you to the Texas Help site, where you can access all course pacing guides and begin to orient yourself not just to the pacing, but also to the order of the mathematics, which I just will pause and say that another uniqueness to Carnegie Learning Mathematics is that every stitch of math is written by a team of 5 mathematicians, Carnegie Learning employees who grapple with the math, who drill down both to the spirit and the letter of the standard, and then order the math based upon all of those factors and the research, those fine-grained knowledge components that are the building blocks of conceptual understanding. So the arc of the mathematics within a grade level and across grade levels is constructed with precision. Our Chief Mathematics Officer is in a series of videos that speaks to the arc of the mathematics for each course. Again, we're going to give you a link where you can go and get that resource. It's another great place for you to gain information. So again, let's get a little bit more practical and talk about what are these daily lessons. So the Carnegie Learning daily lessons, where students are learning together, are in a digital interactive format. So we have custom built these in this interactive platform, really designed for effective remote learning. So as a teacher, I have the ability to assign these lessons to 1 student, to 5 students, to all of my students. I can therefore use these digital interactive lessons and show them on my Zoom screen, or incorporate them into any way that I am teaching remotely and teaching in class. And I think we'll all cheer at the thought of this fall, everyone being on campus and everyone learning in a more traditional way. But nonetheless, those daily digital interactive lessons are designed to facilitate student learning. They're coherently aligned to the TEKS, and again, create that flexibility for whatever the learning environment needs are. How districts get access to these materials is all digitally through an LMS integration. Our customer success team and our technology integration experts work with district technology administrators on rostering and single sign-on. So students would access and teachers would access the materials in a very familiar way. We also have the ability to directly roster students in the system. So there's flexibility in how that access, that digital access, comes in. Those lessons, yes, are digital, but there is printing capability. So if students ever need to be able to download a PDF and print it, or even just download a PDF and use it in an environment when they're not online, that capability sits right within the digital platform. So super practical ways to access. Accessibility for all learners is of supreme importance. And so you see a list in the purple box of the many ways that we've been collaborating through this development and review process to create greater accessibility for all learners. And if you have authority or responsibility for that aspect of learning in your district, again, drop a note in the chat. We'd love to talk with you more, show you more about what is integrated into the teacher resources for accessing all learners. So I mentioned this site, and my colleague Sharon is going to drop a link in the chat. Teachers have had a challenging year. That's an understatement, isn't it? And we see them as quite heroic. And so we have put in so many support measures for teachers, including an onboarding process for teachers. We've developed this Texas Math Solutions Support landing page. I'd love for all of you to grab that link, bookmark it, and within each of these tiles, you'll see articles and videos and all kinds of helps, so that for teachers or for leaders, if you're working late at night and really need some information, this is a go-to site. When you drill down into any one of these links, you're going to see an expanded page again of articles and quick tips, so that at point of use, you have support. Likewise, Carnegie Learning stands unique in another way. We have an entire department of master math practitioners, math experts who were once Carnegie Learning math teachers in classrooms across the country, and specifically our team of professional learning experts in Texas, or Carnegie Learning math teachers somewhere in Texas. And they stand ready and have, many of you may have already interacted with them in various trainings that we've done in collaboration with our TEA partners. And they are leading professional learning in many districts across Texas right now, ramping up for summer training, ramping up to prepare districts to implement the Carnegie Learning materials with a high level of fidelity and really support that teacher shift to teaching mathematics in a way that develops student agency, that develops students' personal and academic voice in the mathematics classroom, and develops students' conceptual understanding. Families have also risen and shined during this last year. And so we have developed some particular supports for families. That same Texas Help Center, important place for families to go to access a lot of support resources for them. But one support that I want to call out is this TutorBot. So if I'm a student and I'm working at home and I'm working in an Algebra 1 course from Carnegie Learning, and I'm working on a particular problem. On any device, my smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, I can pull up the TutorBot app, and this TutorBot is programmed to give me hints, systematic hints that help lead me through where I'm struggling with the mathematics. These hints really mirror and replicate the way a teacher, if he or she observed a student struggling, would lean in and make a statement or ask a question to help students through that bit of productive struggle. And then that teacher most likely would walk away, give that student some time, and then maybe come back and offer another hint. So for any problem, there are multiple hints with greater specificity, because ultimately we want students to move through the struggles and develop that conceptual understanding. Remember, it's the students who are doing and thinking. And so TutorBot helps them do that. It helps parents too, so that when parents are also needing support in order to support their students, they can rely on this powerful, innovative tool. There are also lesson instructional videos for every single student lesson. One of our math experts, those videos can be used by teachers in classrooms. They can use by teachers to prepare, to orient themselves to the lesson. And they are a great tool for parents to be able to support their own learners. So let's talk a little bit more deeply about the Mathia software. So remember, this is the learning individually portion of the Carnegie Learning blended solution. So about 40% of a student's experience in a course, they are learning individually in the Mathia software. The uniqueness of the Mathia software experience is, like other math software, and I'm sure you're familiar with some, where students are given a problem and they either get the problem right or wrong. And based upon that, the software makes a decision and either sends the student down this path because the student got something right, or sends the student down this path because the student got the problem wrong. So it's a very binary approach. And certainly for students who are getting something right, getting the right answer, they're moving to harder work in that kind of software. And for students who got the answer wrong, they're moving to easier or lower level work. And one of the problems with only assessing whether students got something right or wrong is we don't know why. We have no idea why. That's what's different about Mathia. Mathia is noticing every move the student makes. Every Mathia problem is multidimensional. It's never a single equation with an answer box. It's a context of a real-world problem, and then students work through that real-world problem using charts and graphs and equations and tables, so that in all of that work, the smart software is architected to know what those students' moves mean about that student as a learner. And the software begins to build this picture of student as learner. As a teacher, in real time, I've got on my dashboard a tool called Live Lab, so that I'm also able to begin to make those deeper observations powered by this information that the students' actions are fueling in the software's algorithms. So one of the benefits of the Mathia software, that learning individually time, is the data deficit that we are all feeling right now, right? We haven't had the opportunity to assess students in ways that we typically do. And what is interesting is that with Mathia, you actually don't need those typical diagnostic assessments, which might sound a little bit alarming even to hear me say that. But from the moment students start working in the software is already diagnosing. So learning is happening while diagnosis is happening. So this software acts therefore like a human tutor, noticing what the student does know, what the student does know, and getting deeper to the why. And it's that deeper why that illuminates what we would call skill gaps or learning loss. So the software can identify and therefore serve up to the student more of what he or she does need to practice on those fine-grained knowledge components that are the building blocks of mathematics. So in summary, Mathia isn't practice software. 40% of a student's experience in the Carnegie learning, blended learning solution can't just be practice. Students are learning individually in the software. They are mastering mathematical concepts because that's the very nature of the software. Carnegie Learning actually began as a PhD project, and this software came out of that project. So developed by cognitive scientists, and this is an important and efficient way to monitor student academic progress while students learn. So here's a screenshot from the Mathia software. You'll notice right in the center this box called a scalometer with all these different colored rings. So for this student who's working on calculating circumference and area of circles, there are 9 fine-grained knowledge components that this student is learning and therefore working toward mastery. You'll notice the different color coding on the circle. I'm guessing you know what the green one means, and I'm guessing you're surmising that the student is making some progress, shown by the blue coloration on some of the circles, and the student hasn't made any progress on a couple of these skills. But because of the multidimensionality of the problem that sits right behind the scalometer, so you can see that the student is given a context and working with a diagram and working with a table, all of these interactions are building that picture of a student as a learner and is getting to that deeper understanding of what the student does and doesn't know, the why behind a student's right-wrong responses within the software. One other aspect of the Mathia software is the programming that gives just-in-time feedback. So again, it's super smart and it knows misconceptions. And when students are struggling in the software, performing certain actions that sort of trigger, this is a misconception, I know this. These just-in-time hints are presented to the students as a tutor, as a teaching tool. So students are learning while working and help students begin to build the proficiency in those knowledge components that students are demonstrating a struggle in. So that way that teachers, of course, would also give just-in-time feedback. The software is performing that function while students are learning individually. And speaking of teachers, that 40% of a student's experience creates an efficiency for teachers. Certainly, math teachers at the end of a class collect papers and then spend time grading and also examining sort of those broad mistakes or mistakes broadly across the class to inform the next day. But by the time the day ends and I pick up the kids and I go to the grocery and I make dinner and I do all the things and I sit down with my stack of 75 Algebra 1 papers, how thorough can I really be? And can I really know the why behind why a student got something right or wrong without a deeper analysis? So Mathia works in companionship with teachers. So if I'm a teacher, my students are in Live Lab, wherever I am, I pull up on my dashboard this data feed that's helping me both monitor, but also understand my students' learning. So I'm going to click in and show you this experience of Live Lab. So if I were a teacher and my students were starting a Mathia session, I would click Get Started. I would activate the class period and go live. And immediately I would see, I was trying to make that a little bit bigger, but I made it too big. Immediately I would see in priority order my roster of students working in the Mathia software. By priority order, at the top of the list is a student who's not even online. So I know I need to intervene immediately. Either the student's having trouble or the student is way off task. That second student, the Live Lab tool tells me has been idle for 5 minutes. So I need to go and I need to intervene with Sterling, like I need to get everyone started in the software. But then I see a student name displayed with a life raft. That's telling me that there's a problem, that this student is really struggling, and extending a life raft is what is in order. Now, as a teacher, I get to make a decision. I can go immediately to the student, and because I know my student really well, that might be exactly what I do. But the other thing I can do is I can click into Live Lab and I can get a better picture of what's happening for that student. I immediately get a remediation suggestion. I immediately get a chart that gives me information about activity versus productivity, two very different things. I can see what the problem is. I can even click into the actual Mathia problem that my student is working. And then I can scroll down and get a better understanding of where the student is in the arc of the workspace, how many problems the student has completed. If the student has taken advantage of something in Mathia called the step-by-step, a step-by-step example button, you may have noticed it on the screen earlier, where a student at any time in the software can click for step-by-step guidance. The student hasn't taken advantage of any of those. That gives me a little more information. And then that scaleometer that the student sees, I also see. So now I have a bigger picture of what might be happening with the student. And because I know my student really well, maybe I monitor, but from a distance, and allow that productive struggle to happen. Or maybe I go immediately to the student and support the student in this learning individually software session. Giving teachers a powerful tool that helps them maximize their zone of genius and giving them powerful data so that they are far more efficient in their teacher moves is one of the greatest benefits of the Mathia software. After a software session, as a teacher, as a school leader, as a district leader, Mathia reporting gives powerful information. So on the screen, you see some boxes describing the kind of reports. I'll summarize and say the power of the data to get inside a student's brain and really deeply understand what the student does and doesn't know is real-time information that then as a teacher, I can do something actionable with that might improve the ability of students in our next learning together time to develop that deep conceptual understanding much more rapidly. Very specifically, the reports include standards-based reports. Practical question, how are my students performing as measured by an understanding of the discrete standards? And so at a class level and down to a student level, teachers, leaders, math stakeholders can see exactly how students are progressing in a gradation that includes proficient to not attempted. Another powerful report is a predictive measure. We call it the applause report. It's an acronym, but the meaning of this is at any given time in the Mathia software, because the software is building that picture of a student as learner and taking in a lot of information about all the moves the student is making and is it making in the software, the algorithm has the ability to futurecast at a future date, even on a date of a high stakes assessment, based upon what the student has shown in the software, how will that student perform? This is a powerful tool that sitting right here in the middle of March would be informative, but let's back the calendar up a few months. Students working in Mathia from the start of a school year, just within weeks, will be able to develop this data, this predictive data, so that even earlier, maybe than usual, we can see those students who are tracking or maybe aren't tracking for success when the stakes are especially high. So I'll come back to this big why. Why the high quality resource of Carnegie Learning Texas Math Solution? And it's because of results. And more than ever, these kinds of results, 2 times the growth of a control group, 2 times the growth of what's typical, is what's possible when Carnegie Learning is implemented with a level of fidelity. And also there's flexibility because within that 60-40 blend, we work very closely with district leaders and teachers to be sure that we are right fitting the Carnegie Learning resources to structures that are unshakable and unbreakable, while at the same time supporting teachers deeply in their professional journey. So, in summary, if you want to learn more or even get started with the Carnegie Learning Math Solution, my colleague Sharon is once again going to drop a link in the chat. And this is to a landing page where you can explore sample materials. You can get to all of those scope and sequence documents. And also you can click that button on the right that says Get Started Today, that black lozenge, and that will connect you to someone on the Carnegie Learning team. And that person will reach out and have a conversation about what you're thinking and how we might be able to help and support. And you can tell us, I'm just really interested right now. You know, this resource is not going to cost my district any extra money. So I'm going to take this resource and sort of toss it in and kind of hope it magically works. Might work, and we support that. If that's exactly what you're thinking, then by all means, let us know. We also are interested in hearing from district leaders and school leaders who can observe this information and think, you mean there's an opportunity here to use high quality materials that are research proven at no additional cost to my district's budget, and I'm willing to support it with professional learning just to see in an experimental mindset if now is the time to really accelerate student learning in an efficient, effective, and proven math solution to address this big issue that we name learning loss, but in a way that identifies what students do know and then builds in a scaffolded mastery pathway so that what students don't know can be efficiently taught and learned, because ultimately learning only results from what the student does and thinks. We, as the adults in the room, have the responsibility to create the conditions under which students can do and think mathematics every single day. So thank you very much. I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions that anybody wants to ask aloud, or any questions in the chat that my team wants to read aloud because you think it might be helpful for the broader audience.
I have a question on Matthew. Really liking what I'm hearing about Matthew. Some of it is a little surprising, but in a good way. My question is, the materials in Matthew are meant to be done in the exact same sequence obviously along the lines with the printed materials or the in-class materials, the collaborative learning piece. Is it possible to change the sequence and customize it? Now, I've been told that that is possible, but my question is, how does that affect, like, because math builds, and so if you do it in a different order, are you going to run into questions and items that say, oh, well, I need to know that already first?
I love your question, and I can just tell what your brain has been processing. So the answer is yes, absolutely. There are ways within Mathia to customize sequences. Now, there's an asterisk there, and I just want to spend a moment talking about the asterisk. And Barron, I know you and Chris have been working together, and be happy to spend a little bit more time with you one-on-one around this. But there are some limitations to how granular that customization can happen, because exactly what you said, those building blocks, those fine-grained knowledge components have to be at some places in the learning sequential. So some of that has to hang together and is unshakable, unbreakable. However, some of the sequences around larger topics, again, we call those workspaces in Mathia, have the ability to be broken apart or rearranged. So the answer is yes. To some extent, the Mathia sequences can be customized. Now, just to say aloud, there is a completely different version of Mathia that I'll just name, that gives a much more flexible approach down to a much more granular level, but that would be for a different conversation and probably even for a different use case, because it is our recommendation based upon the research that the blended model includes the student daily lessons, learning together, and the Mathia sequences as they are created, with, again, some ability to customize, but we really want to collaborate and partner with you so that you know the potential stumbling blocks of that process of customizing, but working 40% in the software, learning individually to make up the conditions under which students can achieve that kind of growth in mathematical proficiency. So yes, and is the answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. So follow-up question is, one of the things you said about when they're in Mathia and they all start on like the same question, and then based on their response, they're sent in different directions. Did I hear you correctly? Is that true about Mathia?
It is true about Mathia. Again, there's a little asterisk there. There are some parts of the workspace that all students do from beginning to end. We call those concept builders. By the name, you can imagine why. We want all students to experience these concepts. And then there are other parts of the workspaces called mastery. And those workspaces are the ones that respond to the learner moves in precise ways.
Well, the reason I ask is the very specific issue we're in right now. It's, I apologize for people being too specific, but it brings up the point. If you get a kid in Algebra 2 who, because of COVID, did not ever experience in any way, shape, or form quadratic functions before Algebra 2, right? So they're working on Mathia, and the very first lesson applies that learning, which they would assume that they've had. So if they're in Mathia and it finds out from their work that they're just not getting any of that, does it scale them down to a previous course material to fill in those gaps, or how does it do that?
So it can, yes. And in a situation like you just described, again, we'd love to have a partner conversation that asks the question, well, should we identify some students for Algebra 1 Mathia? And would that be appropriate for the student? So it's not cookie cutter, right? We want to really match the use case to what the student needs are. But within any course, to answer the question very specifically, can it draw upon content that came before in other courses? Absolutely. And that is part of how it does function.
Thank you all so much for your time today. We are at time. So I do want to make sure that we let Carnegie get back to their days, because I know they have things going on as well, and also let y'all either get ready for the next session or move on with the rest of your day as well. But wanted to thank the whole Carnegie team for being here today. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks. See you all.